Oh yeah, that's definitely the bass line. What's up, everyone? This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com, and in this video, I'm going to be walking you through the steps of creating a drop for a tech house type of beat. Now, tech house is usually what I gravitate to when I'm listening to house, and I thought it'd be fun just to kind of create and walk you through the steps of creating one. So let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so let's start by taking a look at the drums. So here I have a drum rack loaded with some sounds in Ableton Live, and we have our pattern. It's a pretty straightforward house pattern here with the kick drum playing at every quarter note and every bar, 4 on the floor. Then we have our clap on the 2 and the 4. And then we have a hi-hat between those to kind of accent that upbeat. You can see I also have another clap layered here. And that's a bit of a more chunkier clap. And if I zoom in, I'll notice that it's slightly off the grid. Now, the purpose behind that is to actually kind of add more beef to that clap. And by not having it exactly on the grid, it causes this flam effect, giving it a little bit more tail into the clap. Now, this pattern is a pretty straightforward house beat pattern that you're going to find in a lot of dance music. And at times when I was starting producing music, it wasn't so much of identifying a house pattern. It was pretty easy. Got it. But then I would end up spending hours tweaking the sounds because they really didn't match the tone, the punchiness, and the overall vibe that I would often hear on my reference songs or the reference tracks that I was using. And so I would spend hours tweaking snare drums and things like that, when in reality, I should have just spent the time looking for the right sounds to begin with and then hitting the ground running. And so it pays off just to get the right sounds from the get-go. And really, a lot of the sounds nowadays that are going through, whether it's Splice or many sample pack locations, have so much processing done to them. You don't necessarily have to continue processing them. So there is no point for me to add a compressor to this kick or a clap or anything because it sounds fine. And so what I'm doing is, as a whole, the whole drum rack, I'm just loading a drum bus plugin on here. And that's really just going to add just some grit. I'm sharpening up putting the sustain up on the transient here, and which means that I'm going to get more, just a little bit of that body from the drums, and then some low end enhancement using the boom knob here. So this is the drums without it. And again, that sounds fine too. Put the drum bus on. And just adds that beef and the definition that I'm looking for. So that is cool, but oftentimes what I like to do is also layer my foreground beat. This is what I'm going to call this, my kick, clap, and hi-hat. That's my foreground beat. I'm going to layer that with a loop. And I oftentimes sometimes might even find a loop that has maybe the same exact pattern, but there's some artifacts to that loop that really help gel and glue the drums together. So here is a top loop. And we've got an EQ just to take away all the low end, because I want the focus of that low end or the kick energy to coming from my kick and my foreground beat. And then we've got this erosion here, which is adding some noise to this loop. And that's it. So with the EQ, it thins it out. Layering this loop with our drums. Just gives the definition, and that's it, right? It's right out of the oven, ready to go. And oftentimes that's all it takes. And it's almost, the battle is really within my head to get over the notion of, well, it's still not right. And then I would stay there tweaking. But honestly, as you grow and mature into producing your own music, you have to then let go of the immediate, just trust, okay, that sounds fine. Let me then go into creating a bass line or a groove that then really just gets my head bobbing. So I think that's the most important aspect when creating any form of EDM. All right, so now we've got the drums in a good place. I've got a tambourine here that I can add maybe to hype up second half of a drop. but I'm good there. So here's the drum bus. Let's solo that. And I'm gonna walk you through a couple things I'm doing with this drum bus here. Let's go ahead and bypass all this. And here's the drums without it. Now, besides it being louder, um, what I'm trying to do is I want more of that crunch and grit and the mids to come forward, and that's what's gonna really help kind of glue these drums together. So we're gonna start with a glue compressor, and I'm not doing a lot of compression. It doesn't really need that much compression. I just wanna tie the loop that I've placed on my drums. I just wanna kinda gel them together a little bit. Look what happens when we crush the compressor. We bring the threshold all the way down. Who's the loudest person? It's gonna be my kick drum. So the kick drum is really just kinda slamming that compressor, and so I don't really want that. I want the kick to be tucked a little bit, and then that's gonna help everything else under the kick kinda rise up, and it just sounds more, cohesive that way. One of my favorite ways to kinda glue things together is by using saturation, and I'm using FabFilter's Saturn plugin here, and it's set to a warm tape. Let's go put that on. Just and then the mix knob, just kinda balancing it to taste. It's not all the way at 100, cranking the drive here, and that does a really great job of just adding some warmth to it. Then I've got this, coffee plugin here by Acoustica Audio. It's a great, Pultec EQ emulation. I'm using this to just give a nice low-end boost and some crispy high-end boost as well. I had this OTT multiband, but I'm not actually using it. Just trying out, see if I liked what it did to the high end, and I kinda like exactly where it's at right now. And then what I'll do is later on, I might use an EQ if I need to kinda just correct any frequencies that might be clashing with anything else. But for right now, as producing stage for this, let's just run with what we got. Then on top of just adding that to the drums on the drum bus, I'm also going to be using some return tracks to give a little bit more depth and some sizzle. So here on the send B, auxiliary send, which the return track here, there's a room reverb. Now, too much reverb will just kind of wash the drums out, but I do like the depth that it gives. And you can kind of tailor the taste a little bit as you start to add more and more instrumentation. And so the less reverb, the more dry and up front, the more reverb you're putting, the further back it's going to feel. But it does help create some space there. And then on return track C, I'm having a couple plugins here. I've got an EQ3, which I'm just kind of taking away the low ends, anything from 240 and below, and the high end as well. So I'm just focusing on this mid range. And I'm using an erosion plugin on the white noise. And so I'll just solo this and see what we have. That's also a really cool way to create an intro where you're just muting the lows and the highs, and then just kind of bring all that full bandwidth back in when you either start to, you know, maybe 16 bars in the structure, but it's a cool way to start off. But I'm using this in the sense to add some sizzle and texture to the drums. So it just gives a little bump on that low mid and that body, and it just fills it up nicely. So I'm using these two techniques to create some dimension with the room reverb and with the erosion or any type of saturation or maybe even a digital distortion plugin to add some sizzle and beef up some of the mid range. All right, now I want to draw your attention to this vocal chop that really inspired the whole direction for this idea. And usually that's the case. And it doesn't necessarily mean this is the same approach you need to take when producing house or any form of EDM or any music for that matter. There's a lot of principles that can be gleaned and learned from a specific person's workflow and the way they arrange songs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the same exact way you need to incorporate it in your workflow. Now, I started with this vocal chop. I'm using Arcade from Output. came across just selecting and going through and cycling through a couple of patches, landed on a cool vocal chop phrase. And then here is the actual phrase I'm doing. Now, here's the thing. I started with this and it really sat well with the groove. But what I often like to do is I will place a side chain, whether it's a plugin or using a compressor set to the side chain of the kick, while I'm actually auditioning and playing, whether it's a bass line, a vocal chop, synths. And I often see that the feedback I get with the side chain on is different. I will perform or play differently with plugins on than I would when there's no plugins on the actual track. So one thing I want to encourage you to do, if you haven't done this already, is try placing some kind of sidechain plugin. In this case, I'm using the LFL tool here, and this is acting somewhat like a sidechain as well. It's just sweeping out the beginning. And as I had this on the actual arcade plugin and auditioning the notes, it was really cool in that effect that it gave it. It just gave this feedback that was different, and I performed it differently. And so I did the same thing with the bass line, which we'll walk through and I'll get to in a little bit. But having the sidechain on really did add a new depth to the rhythm and the response that I got. So I say all that so that sometimes this also can be an inspiring thing that you add into the performance aspect. So you place a sidechain plugin on your bass line, or your bass instrument or your synth instrument, or in this case, a vocal chop, and start actually auditioning and playing different rhythms. And you're going to see that because of that sidechain, you're getting a different response and you might perform it differently. So let's go ahead and start working on the bass line. So for this, let's go and use Ableton Live's wavetable. Now, if you have any synth or stock synth that you might have in your DAW with one or more oscillators on it, you can easily follow along and get the same results. So I'm going to drag that onto my MIDI track. By default, set to a sine wave. And I think I want to go and start with a sawtooth. I wanted that nice rubbery type of sound, and I could have been inspired by any number of references, but in my mind, I just wanted something that was a bit bouncy, even in the tone. And I think a sawtooth would be great for that. So we'll go a couple octaves lower, and let's bring the cutoff frequency down. We're going to set this to monophonic. So that means that we're just allowing this to have one voice at the moment, so we don't get any overlap. And now let's go ahead and route our cutoff frequency to our envelope. We're going to envelope 2. So I'll put this here. We're going to do pretty drastic. So every time that note is played, the envelope allows the cutoff frequency to open. Maybe a little bit of resonance. And we're going to go then and shape our envelope here. And then we'll go to our amp envelope. And then I'm going to just bring the release down so it's nice and short. And bring the sustain up. And I probably go a whole octave lower here. Now, I'm going to change the filter amount here from 12 decibels to 24. And you're going to get a deeper, or actually a more impactful effect with that cutoff. And now let's add a little bit of filter drive. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier by adding a sidechain plugin. So I'm going to use a kickstart. As you can see, because of the sidechaining, we're getting that nice pumping action, and it actually changes the way the performance is happening when I'm playing it. So let's go ahead and bring in the drums and the vocal sample and play the bass line along with that. Now, I just want to take this time to let you know that if this video so far has been helpful or insightful in any way, and you want to grow deeper or learn more about producing EDM, or maybe even take some of the principles that I'm sharing with you or principles that can be found in producing EDM and add them into your current workflow, well, I'm going to let you know that I'm going to be opening up my flagship course, Producing EDM, in which I walk you through a step by step blueprint on how not just to produce EDM, but many of the subgenres that you can find in electronic dance music. So I cover the core essentials, and actually we go into great detail, not just the arrangement and building out the structure, but even using some of the stock plugins that you already have in your DW to help you go across the finish line when producing EDM music, as well as covering the mixing and the mastering and getting the balance and blend just right. All this is being covered in this masterclass production course. So if you want more information and you want to know when it's going to be open for new enrollment, then I would encourage you to visit beatacademy.com/EDM or click the link below in the description box. That's beatacademy.com/EDM, and you'll be the first to know when the course is going to be open for enrollment. All right, let's get back to the track. Now, I want to talk a little bit the mindset behind the actual pattern itself. It's pretty simple, straightforward, and a lot of the best tech house bass lines are exactly that. They're simple, and what they do is they don't get in the way of all the other instrumentations. They really just kind of carry and really play off well the drum groove that's being created. And so I've got the vocal chop and the bass line. So I have them both here. As you can see, the vocal chop kind of gets it's accenting. This is the note here. They're accenting these two bass notes. So it's just a matter of just getting that rhythm and pattern that just feels right. And where you're gonna go melodically with the bass line also depends on the nature and just the overall vibe that you're trying to go for. This is where implementing references and maybe just drawing off of several different references to kind of come with a common denominator to kind of help you decide, yeah, this is a good pocket. But ultimately, what I like to let decide is when my head starts bobbing, when I'm really vibing and feeling the actual progression or the rhythm and the overall groove, I stop there and I just move on to something else because, my technical mind and my ADD would want to continue tweaking and tweaking. So it felt right. I ain't gonna fix, it ain't broke. I'm not trying to fix it. So I start to move on. Now I could use that bass line to also create another element that can be used as a transition to go from the drop to the breakdown, or maybe have it featured in other parts of the song. So by simply just duplicating this bass line, which we have right here, I can then treat this differently and add a little bit more processing and effects to create something unique that I want to use. So here in this section, I have that same bass line. That's the same part we're starting with. But instead of having it as a bass line, we're eliminating all the low end. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that I have the unison on because we're going to make this a nice wide type of sound, giving it 3 voices. I'm using the saturator to give it some nice crunch and drive. And then this filter is really being used as a high pass just to kind of eliminate all the low end frequencies. And then we're using reverb and delay to create that nice vibe. So here's without the reverb and delay. And the pattern is exactly the same as our bass line. And so what we've got is the same oscillator, and then we're just gonna add a delay on here. And then with that reverb right on top of that. And what would be cool is that you can automate this dry and wet, let's say for a buildup. So we'll have this part here, and it might start off dry. So we'll put a point here. And then as this starts to build and build, it'll increase in the dry and wet. And then here's where you can do something cool, like maybe automate the freeze so that it just holds in that one note here and it stays on that. So we'll play it again. And so you can see how that would be used really cool for transition or effect or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that automation on the freeze right now. But yeah, so I'm using this and I also have the sidechain on here and a little bit compression at the end. But this is going to be used as something to add some atmosphere, maybe something I could do as a transition to go from a build up or breakdown into this section here. Or maybe halfway through, incorporate this with the bass line vocal sample and drums. So using reverb and delay and all different types of effect processing can help a synth just get more of that larger than life feel and creates the right type of atmosphere within the track. It's also important to understand the dynamics of the arrangement. And so that you just don't have all of your main groove elements playing throughout the whole time, but yet you're creating a journey that the listener is going on. So at the moment, we have the elements that just created the DNA of this idea, the drums, the bass line, the vocal sample, and I've got that synth bass thing that we've just created. But yeah, those are the main ingredients. That's the core of this idea. And once I've arrived there, I realize, okay, this is the stuff that gets my head bobbing and makes me feel good about what I'm working on. And then I can start adding some elements that then I can then introduce in an arrangement format. Something like this cowbell here. So maybe it doesn't need to happen all the time. Maybe it can just be introduced in the next 8-bar progression. So it actually felt nice when it came in. So I'm going to give that another, I'll take it out there, give this another run here, and then have it come in after that duration. I think that would be cool. As you can start to see, this is, once I had the main elements, the main ingredients of this cake that I'm baking, I then put it into this arrangement mode here. And the goal is to work towards this drop. Oftentimes, what can really help accentuate the overall groove is having a call and response element to it as well. So we've got our drums, our bass line, the vocal chop, and I'm going to now incorporate a nice little chord stab to kind of help accent certain parts of the rhythm. That's just there and doesn't necessarily need to happen every time. And for this, I'm using Serum and I just have it set to 2 sawtooths, oscillator 1, A sawtooth, and then oscillator B is the same sawtooth, just an octave lower with the filter cut off pretty much all the way open. And just using a reverb directly inserted on there with a short decay time. Now you can get really nitpicky and start fluctuating some of the decay time and start tweaking these out. I don't really tend to do that at this stage. I'm just creating the overall vibe. And then I go and I walk through the whole process of automation and the arrangement and making sure that I'm actually taking my listener on a journey. And so that's really important throughout that aspect as well. But that's how you can add some call and response to this, which can really help, accentuate different sections, or it can just help lift the overall arrangement. Now, if this video has been helpful for you and you've been able to add a tip or two into your own workflow, then I'm excited to hear that. And so if you want to go deeper into producing EDM, or if you want to just take some of the principles and the production skill sets that come from producing electronic dance music and add them into your current workflow, no matter what genre of music that you're working in, well, I've got some news for you. My Producing EDM course, which is one of my flagship courses, it's a masterclass that walks you through every step of the process of producing EDM from scratch to finished product, and many other subset genres of EDM as well: drum and bass, future bass, house, and much more. I also go into detail in the mixing and the mastering aspect and taking those ideas and even using stock sounds and stock plugins that you already have in your DAW and getting those ideas, flushing them out into full finished arranged songs. So, if you would like to know when this course will be open for enrollment, then I would encourage you to visit beatacademy.com/EDM or simply click the link below in the description box to be the first to know when this course will be open. So, look forward to seeing you in the course. Also, you want to be sure to subscribe to this video so you can stay up to date with upcoming videos on this channel. And I'll see you next time.